The topic today is design systems, past, present, and future. And if you don't know, my name is Ben Callahan. I am one of the founders of a company called Sparkbox. We are based in the States. We're a digital studio. We do a lot of work alongside our clients' internal teams, working on design systems, large scale websites, digital products, anything that has web technology and design as part of the work. That's what we love. I was just talking with somebody else earlier and a couple of the folks from my team, and I was just reminiscing about how grateful I am to have a team like we do at Sparkbox, because it really does allow me to not have to worry so much about what's happening in the day-to-day work, and to go out and invest in the community and to dig into areas that I just have a lot of curiosity about. I realize I'm very fortunate to have that opportunity. And so I just wanted to quickly say thank you to all the folks at Sparkbox for making that possible for me. It's been incredibly fulfilling to be able to do that for the last few years. A bunch of those folks are probably on the call, so if you're here, thanks for being here. I mentioned this earlier, but that link for the FigJam file is here, and I'll continue to drop links in the Zoom chat if new folks join. But if I miss it and someone's asking, you can just go share, grab the link up in the FigJam file and drop it for them too. So, and that kind of leads me to the next thing that I wanted to share, which is that we do have a code of conduct. It's in that FigJam file. It would mean a lot if you would take a minute just to read that, but I can summarize it very simply by saying stay in learning mode, right? If we if we all just come to this conversation with the idea that we're here to learn and everybody here has something to teach you, that really does create a nice, healthy space for all of us to exchange ideas and to kind of challenge each other. So that is essentially our code of conduct. Of course, if you have issues today, please just don't hesitate to DM me in the Zoom chat. I'll be following along there. And you can message myself, or you can message Katie Jennings, who's also in there and will be active in the chat as well. So just let us know, and we'll make sure we pause everything and address any issues that happen. I appreciate all of you staying respectful and honoring this idea of learning mode. That's pretty important for us. For that to work, that means the FigJam file is completely open. So be careful in there. Of course, I want you in there adding notes, taking notes, asking questions. We'll have some activities to do in there. Of course, be active, but also be a little bit careful in there. And if you make a mistake, you can always just undo. Command Z will get you back if you accidentally remove something or whatever. No big deal. And then, of course, the Zoom chat will be open and active today too. So it's hard for me to sort of follow along with everything that's happening there. So if you do have a question in particular that you want us to discuss, I would ask you just to drop that. There's little question sections next to each of the main areas in the FigJam file. So you can always drag a sticky note up into there. Or you can, if you Katie Jennings in the chat, maybe she can edit for you in the FigJam if that's more helpful for you. So just make sure you let us know, and we'll make sure we try to address all those things. The agenda for today is actually pretty simple. I've been doing a lot of digging down some rabbit holes over the last few weeks, just kind of looking into probably the last century of branding, design, architecture, and systems thinking. And I kind of wanted to start the day just by examining the shared history that we have, but that we don't often think about in our daily work, right? You get signed in, you're opening Jira, you're looking at cards, you got to move across a board, and it's just not the right mindset, right? To be stepping back, and thinking about what has happened in, similar parallel industries that we could maybe learn from. And so that's kind of how I would like to start. Then I'll kind of give you my current view on the state of design systems today. And I would say that's really sort of inclusive of the last couple years, I don't know, 3 to 5 years or so up to today. And then finally, we'll spend some time talking about the future of systems, of design systems, and we'll talk a little bit about our responsibility in shaping that future. So I think with that, I'm going to drop the link one more time in case some other folks have just joined. If you're just joining, jump into that FigJam file and introduce yourself. You'll see a spot at the top. But otherwise, I think we're going to get rolling. Is everybody good? Give me a thumbs up if you are. Okay. Thank you, Sandra. All right. Laura, Rebecca, love it. Thank you all. Appreciate it. So let's talk a little bit about the past. So back before we had digital stuff, right, there were so many visionary individuals that were finding really interesting ways to work systematically. And there are a lot of these folks that I could bring today into this conversation, especially the early 1900s, just so much interesting work happening in that time. But I think I wanted to start today with somebody named Jan Tschichold. And these are just looks like somebody you might see in like an old Christmas movie or something. He just looks like a cheery old dude. And he's here doing what he loves, right? Which is looking at a book, maybe perhaps designing some typography. He was born in 1902. He became a really well-known calligrapher. I think his father was a calligrapher. He was also known as a typographer and a book designer. He spent a lot of time in his later career working with Penguin Books. And in 1928, he wrote this kind of seminal publication called The New Typography. This I wanted to start with this because it sort of marks in sort of the history of design, of graphic design, of typography. It kind of marks this shift, this moment where we kind of transitioned away from the previous approach, which was very ornamental typography, toward more user-focused design of text. This was kind of like if you're a sort of a modern designer and you've kind of looked into this stuff, this is kind of what we point to as like the manifesto for modern design. And there's a nice excerpt in here that I'll just read quickly. He said, "Both nature and technology teach us that form is not independent, but grows out of function, out of the materials used, and out of how they are used." And with this statement, he's kind of referencing back to an architectural principle from the late 1800s by Louis Sullivan. You're probably familiar with this phrase, right? Form follows function. And the reason I chose to start with this is because, we're thinking about design systems, right? With the new typography, this is the author really looking to other older disciplines, in this case, architecture, to challenge the status quo. And he was really trying to find ways to bring the practicality and the systems-minded approach of architecture to type design. If you think about it, architecture has been with us for as long as we've needed shelter, which is basically from the very beginning of our existence. And so, of course, functionality was key in architecture. But once we solved some of the problems of functionality, we started to get into the beauty of architecture and the form of it. And, this idea that form follows function has sort of stuck with almost every discipline since then. We use this phrase all the time, but we don't often understand where it came from. If we skip ahead from late 20s or so into the late 50s, this is 1958, there was the publication called The New Graphic Design. And this was the year that it was released. There were, I think, 18 issues of this publication. And these authors were mostly European, and these authors were advocating for kind of a Swiss style of typography. And by that, I really just mean this kind of like the clarity that was offered by the Swiss grid. So if you look at what was happening in the design in Switzerland at the time, it was very grid-based. You can kind of see even from the layout of the first issue and the second issue how they're so focused on grid layouts. And before these Swiss designers were doing this, it wasn't really common to take this kind of structured approach to layout. So this was kind of introducing a new concept. Around that same time in the U.S., Thomas Watson Jr., who was at the time leading IBM, invited a guy named Elliot Noyes to be the company's first design consultant. And he undertook a massive program to incorporate design thinking, or at least what we call today design thinking, into every aspect of IBM. In March of 57, Industrial Design Magazine wrote about this project. And I'm going to read a bit of this for you, and some of it's on the screen here. They said, "Not long ago, in February of 1956, architect and industrial designer Elliot Noyes was asked by IBM to become the consultant director of design. And since his appointment, he's led the company into an ambitious and unusual program to coordinate and upgrade design across the board, every aspect of the company's vast operations. This extends from the IBM trademark through packaging, graphics, exhibitions, interiors and interior furnishings, to the business machines themselves and the buildings of the company. This was one of the first holistic systems of design that was applied to one of the largest companies of its time. And what I love about this, it's IBM. And one of the things that I love about IBM's approach today to design systems, if you go look at Carbon, is this grid, this idea of a grid. They have what they call a 2x2 grid, and it is used in the design language that they describe all the way through into their design system, into Carbon. And what's amazing about it is it's the same grid they use to lay out office space, the same grid they use to lay out business cards, print materials, digital products, you know. And so this is what that's rooted in. 1956, really sort of opening up this idea of like, how, if we were going to design an organization and everything about it, what would we do? And that's the work that this group was doing in the late 50s. Fascinating stuff. And if we skip to the next decade, in the late 60s and even into the early 70s, I don't know if you recognize this name or face, but Massimo Vignelli kind of stormed onto the scene, designing some of the most memorable systems you will have seen to date. It's beautiful stuff. I spent way too many hours digging through all of this stuff. But in 1970, there was a pretty monumental bit of work he did when he partnered with Bob Nords to rebrand the New York City Transit Authority. And the standards manual they created for this is literally, you could put this on your coffee table. It's just stunning. It's beautiful work. And they were really just getting started. Later that decade, Vignelli developed the Unigrid system. This was largely influenced again by the Swiss style designers like Brockman. And they used this exact grid to basically redesign the National Park Service brochures and signage. And these systems created some of the first evidence of component-like repeating structures, reusable templates. You can see we're looking at an example of one of those templates sort of specifically for this part of the Klondike Gold Rush. A shared language for color, for type, for layout. And in addition to all of that, they included rules for how to apply these things consistently. This was really, in effect, a really very robust design system for the print world. It's really cool stuff. I would definitely encourage you to go dive into some of these on your own and see some of the beautiful design and typography that was done at in this time. In 1975, another two designers, Dane and Blackburn, they defined a really nice redesign for the NASA organization. This is affectionately known as the NASA worm because the red sort of logo looks like maybe something that a worm would do, kind of crawling through. And this logo has been retired, but this was like one of many beautiful like systems of design that these individuals were really creating. This again was like mid 70s. Such beautiful work. I'm seriously considering buying copies of these old brand manuals just to have in my house. I just want to look through them and kind of soak in this stuff. It's really cool. In 1987, Apple released the Human Interface Guidelines, and then the late 90s, Sun Microsystems released the Java Look and Feel Design Guidelines. These were two large digital kind of forward organizations that were starting to think about how they could sort of start to, you know, unite interface design across all of their products. And I love this example. I started digging through both of these, and in the Sun Microsystems one, I just want you to see what they were trying to solve clear back then. We are still trying to solve today. You can see the button in this case. And they had some interesting approaches to buttons. Of course, they were thinking about different types of buttons. They had defaults, they had non-defaults. They even had, of course, icon buttons. And I think they did one up on us because they had vertically stacked icon buttons. I haven't seen one of those in a long time. Fascinating stuff. And all kinds of rules about how to use these and when to use them, right? And of course, they were thinking about these little tiny components, not just on their own, but also within the context of the interface itself. So they were thinking about, if we put these together in a row, how much space do we need above them, below them, between them? It's really interesting to go dig into all of these things. If you fast forward again to 2006, Yahoo released YUI or UI. This was an open source CSS library essentially for building web applications, and they used this throughout a lot of their products in the early 2000s. It had color tokens, believe it or not, long before we talked about that today. They had all kinds of instruction around colors and just color theory. And believe it or not, they even had code snippets you could copy and paste and use in your own applications. Really interesting stuff. Again, let's fast forward to 2009. 960 grid system was released. Does anybody remember using this? Anybody show me your hands? Yeah. Oh my goodness, I see you, Elise. Yeah, this was all over the place. And this, it's so funny because I was thinking about the timing of this. 2009, 960 grid system came out. That first version was very much fixed, right? This was pixel-based layout. And at the same time, later that year, iPhone was introduced. And kind of like then 2010, Ethan's article on responsive web design, right? Things were at the verge of changing in our industry in this moment. And we were really trying to solve a lot of these things, right? This 960 grid was one of many tools that we could choose to pull down and incorporate into our work to just solve some of these common problems, right? We were doing this across organizations at the time in the industry. Yeah, Jeremy, the HTML5 boilerplate, I use that thing all the time. I mean, it was just reset style sheets. Like, I mean, there were so many good things happening, and I missed this time in the web for sure. A few years later, in 2011, both Bootstrap and Zerb's Foundation were released. These were essentially massive component libraries, right? And so some folks are still using Bootstrap work today. And I'm show me your hands. I'm sure you've used one of these, right? Like these are familiar tools. Yeah, Caroline. Yep, Kilby, love it. I mean, this was the stuff we lived for. I had so many conversations with clients who were, in the same kinds of things that we talk about today. At this time, they were saying, why would we build our own, websites when we could just use Bootstrap or we could just use Foundation? And a lot of those same things, those same different versions of those same conversations we're having today in the system space. A little bit further along in our timeline, Brad wrote about atomic design in 2013. Google introduced the very first material design at Google I/O in 2014. And then that same year, just later in the year, Salesforce Lightning came out. And then in 2015, IBM Carbon was introduced, right? So this time between like 2013, when Brad wrote Atomic Design, and 2015, we had some serious stuff happening. This was moving beyond just the industry kind of open source solving problems for each other, and organizations starting to take some of that work in-house and say, I want to solve these problems for my org, for my brand, for my products. And that's really kind of what we started to see. How different, by the way, is material design now, right? With the new expressive version, very different than this first very flat material design. 1 year later, 2016, is when Figma was released. And this is also when the very first Clarity conference happened. And between 2016, so if you don't know Clarity, Clarity was the original design system conference, first ever event that was very focused on systems work, design systems work in the digital space. Between 2016 and 2018, the US Web Design System, Shopify Polaris, Adobe Spectrum, Gov.uk, and dozens more were released. This was a huge time. I mean, this was like prime, like we're going to get in and figure this stuff out for our own company time. And so many people started to kind of flood into the space at this time. It was really, really fun space. In 2019, the W3C Design Tokens Community Group was founded. And just a couple weeks ago, they announced the first stable version of the design token specification. So 2019 to 2025, 6 years of work that went into that, right? This was a wild time. And when I think about all the things that happened over this, of these decades, really, of work, there's a few themes that kind of come to me, like I look across this, and this again was kind of an abbreviated history of systems, right? I skipped so many things. It took me forever. This history section was probably 2 hours long by itself. I had to start cutting and cutting and cutting to get it down to just sort of like hit on the big moments. But there are some themes in this, right? Those German and Swiss and Italian designers back in the early 1900s, they had no idea that their work would be the foundation of the digital systems that we are working on today. They were just taking the next logical step in their own path, right? There wasn't intention into the future back then, like there, and I think that we oftentimes are probably in the same boat. It's really hard to do your work now thinking that it is a marker for the future, but that is the truth, right? And so that's something that I want to hang on to, and we'll come back to that. I think there's also this idea that, like, if you start looking through the old brand standards manuals, those early guidelines from Apple and IBM and Yahoo, and some of those first public systems from Google and others, you can see there's this trend of just, we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to add more stuff. We're going to add more assets for our teams to manage, right? And of course, it's not necessarily that having more assets for teams to consume is bad, but we have to acknowledge that the more assets we have, the more complexity and maintenance we also introduced. And so there's something there, right? And that feeds into this last point, which is that our first decade or so of digital design system work is a story of adding complexity. It's almost like there was an unspoken agreement that we all had that we should just be making systems that could solve every problem instead of just the ones that were common to, or the ones that were sort of seen in the overlap of our own products. And so that meant we just kept making things more and more complex. Now, I want to pause in my presentation here, and I'm going to flip us over to the FigJam file. So give me a moment to do that. Oh, I love it. Seeing all your smiling introductions there. Beautiful. Thank you for doing that. If you're just joining, I'm going to drop that link again for you here. So join us over in the FigJam. I'm a fan of collaborative learning, folks. So this is the part where you get to raise your hand in Zoom and jump into the conversation with me. As part of this event, I asked you 3 questions, and the first of those questions was a simple one. It was about your history. I asked you, how did you find your way into design systems? And I've been reading through all this data, and it's interesting to me to read. It actually reminds me of a lot of what we just saw in the history of systems, the things happening in the space that led us to where we are. There's a lot of stuff that's like this organic stuff, accidentally. I was always a systems thinker. I was just trying to figure things out. I started as a book designer. It started organically. I stumbled into it, right? Like that theme of just sort of like accidentally finding your way into a space that you love was everywhere in these answers. I've only pulled a handful of these. There's 105 responses, and if you haven't yet, you can check out the raw data file here. Of course, we won't be opening that today, but there's a ton of data in there if you want to dig into these answers. It's really fun to read through. I tried to kind of like read through these. Excuse me for a moment. Sorry about that. I tried to kind of read through all these answers, just looking for the patterns. Like I was trying to figure out what was common, like what were the things that brought us into the space. And the number one for sure was this idea of the accidental practitioner, right? And I think that's, in some ways, that's kind of how I landed here. I started as a software engineer, transitioned to design, and found myself trying to hold hands on both sides of these disciplines, always trying to bring these folks together. And systems work is that, right? That's what we do. And so I think that sort of led me into this field. And that reminds me of this other one, the bridge builder. There's so much in these answers about wanting to just figure out how to help designers and developers work better together. Right? There's like this altruism in the perspectives of folks in our space that I love. A lot of you said you were just systems thinkers from the beginning. And of course, that's double-sided, right? That comes with an amazing ability to be the person in the org that sees the commonalities and finds ways to encode those into a system. It also comes with the struggle of not being able to turn that off sometimes in our own personal lives, right? And being the one who sees that these things are going to lead to a tough response or a tough situation, and others can't necessarily always see those things like we can sometimes. So there's 2 sides to that, of course. And then the organizational need. A lot of folks were just in a place in their careers where the organization was struggling in some way, and the clear solution to that problem was thinking about reuse, solving those problems well one time. And so we kind of found ourselves doing this work. So I'd love to hear some stories. If you don't mind sharing just a little bit about your background, raise your hand in Zoom. I'll just call on you. I want to hear a little bit about what brought you into this space. Tell me a story. Somebody be first. Somebody be brave and go first. The awkward silence. Come on, y'all. Okay, Sandra, go. Thank you.
It's hard to find the unmute button because I have Zoom on my TV and Figma Jam on my computer. So it's kind of hard, but I saw that you pasted my quote in here, so I might as well start. So I read about design patterns within architecture from Christopher Alexander while I was reading a paper on communication between designers and developers. And that was back in 2012 during my 1-year master in human-computer interaction. And I heard about a conference in around 2017, 2018. And I was like, this is awesome. I want to work with this kind of details and complex systems and a company as a whole. And I was like, oh, this is awesome. I want to do it. And there wasn't a lot of design systems in Sweden at this time. So at my current work, it's actually one of the first one, except Spotify. They were actually before us. But so I started working with design systems in 2019, and I've been at it since.
Amazing. I love that. Thank you for sharing. That's a cool story, and I love that you came to design systems through Christopher Alexander. What an incredible entry into the space. Goodness, we're going to talk about some of his work later. And just so you know, too, there's a section at the bottom. I'm going to hopefully not make you sick by scrolling so quickly, but there's a resources section at the bottom where I've dropped all the things that I'm referencing. There's some links out to some of that stuff here, and The Timeless Way of Building right here. Sandra, maybe that's one of the books that you read, or A Pattern Language, but his work is tremendously influential for me. So I love hearing that that's also something that you found inspirational. Who else has a story? Jump in, guy.
I don't know how exciting the story is, but I've always worked, adjacent to design systems, or had design systems as part of a design practice that I was leading. But this specific role that I'm right now was specifically hired to lead a design system, and I was weighing two offers. I had this offer or VP of design somewhere else, and I asked people for their opinion, which one should I take? And people said, don't take the design system team because you're just going to be about components 24/7. But I took it. And my life is not about components because that's what the team does. I don't care about components.
I love that. Yeah. So what is it about, Guy, as a leader in systems?
It is, I don't know. I mean, I've always been, coming from, I think like yourself, coming from software engineering or software development, you already think in abstractions, you already think in systems, right? Like, what is the system that can take care of these separate things? And it's really hard after years in product design, going into design systems and sort of going back into that systems thinking, really hard to go back to think of, oh, I don't want to go back to like working on a specific product. That's not as interesting as trying to solve a problem that scales across a lot of different things. For me, that's the exciting thing.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a scale to the work that is really interesting for some folks, and I definitely feel that too. And I love the idea or the reference, Guy, that in the engineering space, that was my background too. Everything is systems, right? Like the way code works, even the way CSS works, we create a class and so that we can reuse it, right? Like that sort of concept is built, it's baked into the learning in the computer science field. and not as much, at least it wasn't as much in the design space. So it's
One of,
cool to hear you
yeah,
think about that.
I would say one of my kind of gripes or pet peeves, it's not a big one, but is that seeing how designers are inventing or discovering all those things that are kind of like bread and butter in engineering, like tokens or just reusability or
Yeah.
abstraction. And designers are, ooh, slots. But yeah, that's how engineering works, for example. So
Yeah.
it's
That's
interesting.
It's so true, and I can't tell you how many times I've seen design teams have that aha moment of like, reusability or like something like that. Take it to an engineering team, and the engineering team's like, "What are you talking about? We always do this." So there is a little bit of a weird tension that we can create there. But this is awesome. This is great. Thank you, Guy. Anybody else have a story for us? Yeah, Lydia, welcome.
Hi, thank you.
Yeah,
I actually have a quick story that I think relates a little bit to what Guy just mentioned. So I started my career in localization, and I got really, really frustrated with how localization is always like so downstream from the product creation experience, and there's never enough time or money to ensure quality in those experience for our other users. From localization, I transitioned to content design because there was kind of a direct 1-2. Like if you want to make the localized strings better, you make your source strings better.
yeah.
So I kind of moved a little further upstream to, um, help make that downstream impact better, easier for our localization teams. That's where I started getting exposure to our design system team, and I moved into the design system space as a way to scale, like what Guy was saying, because sure, I can write one good string as many times as I want to, but that's not going to scale nearly as well as me putting into the system, this is how you write a good string that's going to localize very well. And this is really like I've found my groove, I think, in this space, because I also don't build components, but I'm very system minded in that, like, if we can centralize the really good, robust, tried and tested practices, then that just makes everything, every domino that falls after that, it makes it so much better. And it's so fulfilling seeing that sustainably and working at scale.
What a great story. I love it. It's like you're chasing bigger and bigger impact, and you've found a way to do that by training the trainers, essentially, like teaching people how to think right, about the problem space. Um, and it's funny because when I hear you talk, I'm also thinking about the idea, of course, that you can scale good things, but systems can be risky too because you put the wrong thing in there and you can scale bad stuff just as easily. Have you ever found that to be the case, Lydia?
That is 1000%, I think, the thing that we're struggling with right now in the age of AI. A good friend of mine last year at a talk said it has never been easier to make bad decisions at scale. And I think about that every single day, about like, how do we mitigate that? I think it's kind of our responsibility as like a systems team that is responsible for centralizing and for scaling to do everything that we can to mitigate these bad behaviors. Oftentimes that means slowing down a little bit, and that's something that product teams like don't love doing. So it's a really interesting tension.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for sharing that. A bunch of us just came from Bristol from Converge, which is the Zero Height Design System Conference that just happened a couple weeks back. And this idea of like, in the age of AI, it's never been easier to make bad decisions at scale. That sort of concept came up in almost every talk in some form or another. It was really interesting to hear. So thanks for bringing that back to our minds, Lydia. Anybody else want to share their story? Casey, what's up?
Yeah, so I studied print design and then did an agency, web agency internship where I started like playing with code a bit and um, kind of got into more on the development side because I would design stuff that would come back different. And I was stubborn, so I figured out how to do it myself. And then I ended up at this spot in between design and development, and sort of just happened to find myself building what we called templates at the time. And it was like pretty big pain point that I was working for a global e-commerce company. They had a ton of localized versions of their website, but designers were thinking in like English in this orientation and like this left alignment versus right alignment with this image and this color of text on top of it. So I was the person that kind of sat between design and development and built out these flexible quote unquote templates for the homegrown content management tool for marketers to set up. So it was a lot of this like component architecture design, the like authoring experience, thinking through the edge cases of design, and then actually building it.
So cool. It's like you sort of had like a combination of maybe like the bridge builder and the organizational need, right? Like you were someone who saw the firsthand the problems between designer developer communication, and also there was a big need, it sounds like, in the org to solve that problem too. So it's really cool, Casey. Thank you for sharing that. There's time for others to share if you'd like to, but also if you don't mind, if you're in that FigJam file, I'd love to have you drop a stamp for me. I'm going to move these over just a bit on or around the area where you feel like you sort of more closely align with your sort of path into systems. So you can do that by pressing the E key and then choosing the stamp tool on the bottom center, and then choose your smiling face. And you can choose and kind of click wherever you'd like in that area. So I'll give you folks a moment to do that if you don't mind hopping in and dropping a stamp for me. And again, here is that link to the FigJam. Awesome. Any other stories to tell? Anybody else want to share their sort of entry into systems? Okay. Quiet. No problem. Thank you all for sharing. Let's dive back into, let me find it here. Okay, you should be seeing the keynote now. Good. Thank you, Brittany. So let's talk a little bit about the present. And when I say the present, I'm thinking primarily about the last, I would say, 5 years or so that have like since I've noticed a shift. And so I want to go back to 2020. And this image might look familiar to some of you. In 2020, and I think, Sandra, you mentioned Spotify earlier, they published this piece. And I think of this as like, this was like a moment in our industry, right? I think this kind of rattled the way that a lot of us were thinking about systems. This post was about how they had shifted from a single centralized design system called Glue to a system of systems, which they called Encore. And in this model, there was a foundational system that was very tight, right? This center bottom left, you can see the word foundation. That was like focused on the overlap and the smallest building blocks. And they had built or enabled these product specific areas, the local design systems for each platform and product, things like web and mobile and iOS and TV apps and all these different combinations of those things that they needed to support. And that each of those local systems were building upon the central foundational system. They were following the composition patterns of that central system and building some of their own stuff. And here's what they said in the article. They said, this time we wanted to design our design system, just like we'd design one of our product experiences. And I think as an industry, like we ate this up. I cannot tell you how many clients sent me this article. Like, I mean, in the middle of every conversation, starting about 21 or so, moving forward, at the beginning, early stages, they would always send this link to me. And I was like reading this and enjoying it, of course, too, like thinking about like we could be so much more intentional in the way that we structure these things instead of just doing what has already been done. I see this article as kind of like a stake in the ground, right? This was like a moment when we maybe collectively realized that we should stop just adding things to our system and start to be more intentional with the way that we architected them. Orgs all were beginning to realize that instead of one massive design system that was just growing and growing until it became unmanageable, we must acknowledge that design system assets are most valuable when they're focused on the overlap of product needs. the components that are common among the products that you offer. But of course, the more products you have, the less overlap there is. Theoretically, when I look at this and think about this, if I'm stepping back from the day-to-day work, what this means to me is that the more complex your organization is, there's a move toward a less complex core system, right? The more stuff you're trying to support with the core, the less overlap. That means that core system becomes very focused. In a sense, for the last 5 years or so, I think it's been a season of pruning, right? We have been trying desperately to meet the needs of our consumers with a much more stable, higher quality, less complex set of assets. But we're also asking those consumers to think very systematically themselves. We want them to do more than just build their products, right? We want them to also build their own recipes or extend the components that we offer, or even build their own local design systems. And when you step back from the day-to-day work in a moment like this, like we're taking today, you can see what's really happening, right? In a sense, all we've really done is shift the complexity away from our centralized team out to the organization itself. On the left here, we have all that complexity contained within our design system. But on the right, we've shifted it out to our consumers across the org. And to address that shift in complexity over the last few years, we've taken a few steps as a design system community, right? One of the things we've done is we've talked a lot about allowing consuming teams to adopt many of the different layers of the system, right? We call that micro-adoption. We've also been much more explicit in terms of defining the contracts between the core central system and these local systems or recipes or whatever else they are. And then, of course, we've had to acknowledge and swallow the pill that systems work is about a lot more than just assets, right? There's a whole layer of organizational culture work here. I wish we had hours and hours together because I think we could spend an hour on each of those three things very, very easily. Luckily, two of those are topics that I've covered or we have covered as a community in past episodes of the question. So episode 31 was with Dave Fung, and we talked a lot about micro-adoption in this episode. And this was the idea that we could think about our systems as layers of complexity and allow consuming teams to adopt across those layers, not just components, but also tokens or, very, very small components. And so there's a ton of information contained in this FigJam file and in the raw data file here. So take a peek at that. And then just this last episode 63, Aaron Potter joined me, and we talked a lot about the contracts between design systems in a system of systems architecture when you have recipes or, these sort of local systems that are enhancing or extending a core. So you can read the wrap up there. You can watch that recap video. There's lots of information about those there. Both of these were really deep conversations. And actually, probably some of you were there for both of those. So thanks for hanging with me in all of these deep conversations. But the third thing I mentioned was culture. And back in Q1 of this year, actually, our first Unconference at Sparkbox of 2025, I did an entire Unconference on this concept that we called the design system value gap. And in that session, I shared this quadrant diagram, and I'm so glad Elise is here because this diagram came out of a conversation on the question that she and I co-hosted. And the question that we asked was, are you making the right things in your system? We were trying to get at, how do you prioritize the right stuff? And I shared this concept of a quadrant diagram in Q1 of this year. Across that x-axis, we mapped out all the assets that every product in your org might need. On the far left, everything that's really common, things like very fundamental, like colors and type and spacing, over to buttons and slightly more complex components, all the way out to far right, where you may have something that is only existing in one product in a very, very niche part of that product, maybe a esoteric color picker somewhere that only is in one place, right? So we kind of mapped things out along that x-axis in that way. And then along the y-axis, we just finally had that acknowledgement that like, okay, systems are a lot more than just the assets we offer, right? And so on the bottom of that y-axis, that's all the really tactical stuff. These are the things consuming teams can just pull right into their projects. It's a Figma file or a component library, whatever. And at the top is the strategic work, right? That's how we make impact through culture, incentives, like changing the way people think and use the system. And so when I think about sort of where we've been, where we are today, we kind of started in the top left, right? Like we didn't have common patterns yet. And so we just allowed every team to kind of work in their own ways. And of course, you can create cohesion there, right? It's just very inefficient because everybody's making their own stuff. You don't have the efficiency of reuse that you get when you've got common patterns that are already established as assets I can pull in. And then we kind of headed into the bottom right, like we talked about that first decade of just like adding more stuff, right? Design systems were growing in complexity, like massive amounts of components, the number of tokens, mind boggling, right? There was that sort of constant expansion of the systems. And really, in a sense, we were very quickly encroaching into product design and development space. And we were kind of breaking our own little boundaries there. Of course, we talked about this, but that led to really big maintenance challenges here. And I put there at the bottom that this is low impact systems work. When you get far out on the right, you're not creating things that are going to be used by many folks because they're so product specific. So the impact is lower for the same amount of effort. And then, of course, we've talked about the bottom left and top right a little bit. The bottom left is where a lot of system teams are landing. This is like pruning, right? We're pulling back. We're saying, let's build just the right things as assets in our systems. And that gets us a really high coverage of the things that are common across products. And honestly, when I think about this today, this is just the baseline for impact, right? You have to do this. You got to do something here. And that top right is sort of like, I think we're finally at a place where we're recognizing it is just as important, if not more important, than the tactical work. And that's that future-proof stuff, the stuff that's really sort of cultural. This is where everybody in the org values the same things, and if we all value the same things, we're going to make decisions that align. And so, that's the power in my mind. And I think, I don't want to spend a ton of time on this diagram. I've written about this. There's a lot of information out there, but I wanted to kind of revisit this quickly and have just a little bit of space for discussion around this. So if you don't mind, I would love to have you join me in the FigJam file one more time. I've got another little exercise for us to do that is related to this. Ooh, and I see some votes are coming in. I love it. Thank you for taking time to do that, folks. I'll take a peek at those later too. When in Q1, when we ran that unconference about the value gap, I actually had folks do this. I had you come in here and do that same stamping exercise to show me where you were currently working. Are you focused bottom left, which is like asset heavy? Are you top right? Are you somewhere bottom right where you're just adding and adding and adding? So what I would love to do today, just so that I have a little bit of data to compare this to, is to have you vote again, but I want you to stamp the places where you're planning to work in 2026, right? So I want you to think a little bit about next year and what the mandate is from your leadership. And I'd love to see you sort of drop a vote. Sorry, there's another link for you, Laura, to join us in there. But please find me here. Actually, I'll bring you all to me in the FigJam. And I would love to see some votes cast here. You can stamp more than one place, but show me where you are focusing in 2026 in terms of your work in the system. So I'll give you just a moment to do that. Are you all not seeing it? Oh, FigJam's acting up. Oh no. Let's see, what can we do to fix that? Yeah, it just says waiting for followers. Interesting. Well, that's okay. Just raise your hand and I'll call on you and we can discuss it. So tell me where you're thinking about this in 26. What is on your roadmap? How are you thinking about the cultural work versus the tactical work? Jump in, folks.
I'll dive in on this one. Um, I would say that I'm spending about 10 and 15% of my time in this very kind of tactical, like maybe right in the middle, like somewhere between like common interaction patterns and product specific patterns, but really right in the middle. Like I'm doing IC work that's implementation work for, supporting product teams building new features or, updating something actually in the system. But I would say that that's probably a fairly like small amount of my time. And it's interesting that you were talking about, it being table stakes to have kind of common components. I'm really personally waffling between like, yeah, but you can just get common components from just about anywhere. Like you already have them. It's not even, I mean, yeah, maybe it's table stakes to have buttons and inputs, but building those things is not particularly complicated compared to building patterns or product specific patterns, or patterns that offer like functionality as well. And that's where I think the real value is to the organization. But I think there's also the pathways to actually delivering that value are much more complicated, especially like through the system. So I would say a big part of what I am doing, I don't know, maybe 60 or 70% is actually more strategic. It's tooling, it's training, and it's bringing people around like, okay, what patterns are we doing? How are we actually changing the system? How are we actually changing the design? And for those of you who don't know me, I work at a fairly small organization. And so, the way that you do that at an organization of my size is quite different maybe than you would do that at, a really, really gigantic company, of, even a moderately gigantic company. But I think that that's where the real value is, especially when you already have some of the common patterns or those are easily accessible to people. And I think that that's the biggest shift that we've seen over the last handful of years is that, at kind of the beginning of design systems, it was really novel to offer common interaction patterns and components. And that's no longer novel or interesting. Like people are like, they just
Yeah.
sort of expect that. And if you can't do it, they're going to go use Material UI or Tailwind or Chatzian or whatever else. Like they will go around you because there's ways now for them to do that.
Yeah. Or they'll go find them in the existing products, right? Like in some case, like the products that exist are sort of the system, for you, right? And at least just dig in a little bit. One follow-up for you. You said, trying to remember how you said it. You said something like there is like the building of the common things is easy, but it's the delivery of those that's hard. Like, what do you mean by that?
I think what I was trying to say was that delivering larger patterns or product things or like more specific things is more valuable, but is much harder. There are not necessarily good pathways to deliver, say, um, a components that also have like functionality or like API calls. Like when I say that there's not a good pathway, I mean, you can deliver a component that does a very specific thing, but then it's not abstracted for use in another way. And when you get into, on the code side, like talking to an API or, doing some sort of like functionality, it gets really, really tangled. And I think that's a new frontier for design systems is like,
Yeah.
how do you have a pattern, a piece of functionality that cannot be delivered in a component or deliver some kind of, transforming functionality that you want to be consistent across all uses. Whereas common interaction patterns, the button, the input, as you say, they're already probably in your code base. Either they're coming from your system or they're not coming from your system. And if you're spending all of your time trying to like do that, I think you're missing out on a lot of like what is actually specifically valuable to your organization.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, it totally did. Thank you, Elise. I appreciate that. Others have thoughts on this. Like, where are you focusing for 26? Raise your hand in the chat. Jump right in. Hey, Vish, jump in.
Hi there. You too. I think following on from what Elise just said, I guess like even in the large organizations, I guess there's a lot of pressure. Well, you get a lot on like AI and innovation and how fast you move in and where, what's the next thing that you're going to build that's really cool and whatever else. But I think it's for us, it's like revisiting foundations. So when we're thinking about that, like it was a Design Systems London event that we went to, and someone said something around like preparing your design system for AI, or AI to be a consumer of your design systems. Again, those revisiting those foundations, which is a good practice to do anyway, despite whether it's going to plug into AI or not. But it's things like, well, we're working on like a bit on a multi-brand level. So there's things that we're thinking of, like when you got multiple brands and multiple platforms, it's things like just cracking everything back open, how many tokens we've got, even thinking about extended collections, like revisiting our architecture so we can like reduce the amount of tokens we have, then revisiting the code. And then things such as like, are the names the same? Are the naming conventions for typography and color are the same? Are the way we've handled web components versus native, iOS versus Android, like just getting all those, like revisiting those foundations so they are super, super tight. And then because I guess even like thinking about last year, maybe into the year before, you get so excited about things such as tokens and all these new features in Figma and whatever else, you end up doing a lot of bloating. So I think there's like a bloatedness, and now it's a sort of refinement, going more minimal. And yeah, I think that's some of the things that we're focusing on, and then just doing some little like proof of concepts. Like now that we've got some of this stuff down and that feels tight in one area, just such as color, for example, then you can put that through having a little play with like MCP servers and code connect and stuff like that. I think it's still, I think we were talking on some stuff around like making sure you're going through every single component and there's a link to code connect, so the code pulls in directly, like crossing all those things off. So even thinking back at Converge, it's like bringing that documentation, bringing those things closer to the consumers. It's all that sort of stuff, I think, is like where we want to really tighten things up rather than go and do some cool shit all the time and do that. Like, yes, do that we wanted that last week. It's trying to put the brakes on and saying, give them a little bit, give them a taster of something, but really the real groundwork is doing the groundwork. Yeah. And that's on a large scale, I think even more important to get that right, because you've got so much more to contend with.
Yeah. Sounds like an interesting combination of tactical and strategic for you, Vish, where it's like, it's not just about making sure all the, I's are dotted and T's are crossed tactically, but also thinking about the impact of those things for your consumers, which I think is, I like that you're trying to kind of pair those. That's great. Juan, what's up? Go for it. Yeah, jump in.
No, I want to say something similar, I guess, to Vishal. I guess our challenges right now and next year are tactical and strategic, but not with a different perspective. I guess building those common components, patterns, building the stuff that we can deliver is the challenge that we have in our core team. For us is a big challenge to coordinate with developers and designers in order to have the same cohesive system. And in the strategic part is more how we as a design system team provide service for the entire company. Trying to train and to teach how to use the design system and how the design system can be part of the culture of the software development in that company. So we will have those two challenges, but I guess more the tactical and the common common stuff is more for the core team, and the strategic things are for the entire culture and organization issues.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Cassie, what are you thinking?
Sorry, I'm not a Zoom person, and my boss just messaged me, so I was distracted. But everything's fine. Yeah, I guess I felt like maybe I had something slightly interesting to bring to this, because I've been in my role for 3 months now and still haven't created a button. So I guess very much in a strategic place, creating a design system in the kind of 0 to 1 space for consumers that include also kind of self-serve. So the brand, the themes can technically be anything. Also a generative AI consumer that will spin up intranet pages for users. So these are all really interesting considerations. And 6 or 7 product squads, which are all racing forwards on this new product. And then there's kind of just me as the sole designer on the design system team, with like four devs, which I just got 2 weeks ago. And so really there is some serious thinking to do around, what are the absolutely essential things that we can create to enable these people to move fast. But when I am a bottleneck and we have such low resources, the most important thing has actually been figuring out the theming model and then the token architecture to support that, which has been quite complex. And how can we create this model and token architecture that can create themes out of brands out of the box and standardize brands that are coming in from, scraped websites or someone uploading their brand PDF or whatever, standardize that, then create themes out of the box, and then make sure those are accessible and kind of robust. So yeah, barely having any time to even think about components yet. But I think these are the kind of foundations that are more important. If we can hand this token architecture to other designers, then at least they can start making their own stuff that will fit within the theming model. So just finding, that's actually been like the most important thing. And then big cultural focus. So much of my time has been taken up by doing talks within the company, explaining to people the value of design systems, showing them the progress, getting buy-in, trying to get developers put onto this, and so on. And it's been really impactful and successful, but I'm actually keen to get my button finished. So we'll get there eventually.
Sun Microsystems has a nice button. Cassie, say just a little bit more about what you've done internally that led to you only 3 months in, I think you said, right? Getting the approval to hire 4 devs, or to get 4 devs working on the system. Like what did you do to create that?
The first thing I did when I arrived at the company was speak to like 40 different people across the whole organization. So I really wanted to get a sense of what was going on and how people were feeling, how they were feeling about the current product and their ways of working, and current past design system attempts. And that, I think, gave me a lot of, I don't want to say ammunition, I think, to make a case for the importance of the design system within the organization. I also, while I was doing that, spoke to and identified 2 developers across the organization who were very switched on to design systems and very keen to work on it, and like felt very strongly about it, and managed to get both of those onto the team. But I think, that piece of just speaking to everyone and just understanding the pain points across the org, being able to really say, look, these are the things that we can attempt to solve by doing this properly, was valuable, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome, Cassie. That's a huge achievement in a very short amount of time. So well done.
Thank you.
Yeah, and hopefully that's, I mean, what's cool about that is all those conversations are part of the strategy, right? Like if you're building relationships with folks who have influence in the org, and that's the kind of thing you need to start shifting incentives, to start shifting the way people think about the work. So that's really cool. Okay, I know FigJam's being a little finicky for everybody, so I'll hop us back over. So I did drop some of the information here and links out to some of those other resources on micro adoption and on contracts between systems. Those are also super relevant to this sort of like moment that we're in, the present moment. But I want to also spend a little time looking at what's next in the future. So thanks to those of you who chimed in. Appreciate that. Give me a moment. I'll switch us back. Oh, just to kind of wrap this up, right? So the big themes when I've been looking at sort of the present state of systems are that we've been able to get a whole lot more intentional with the approaches that we're taking, right? And of course, it's not perfect, right? We're still struggling, and everybody's at sort of a different maturity stage, and all of those things are true. But in general, I see a lot more intention in what we've been doing, which is really inspiring to me. Like that is encouraging because I feel like with that intention, we can turn this practice into what we want it to be. The result of that I'm seeing most commonly is smaller core systems with a big focus on codifying our design decisions, right? Tokens, design tokens. Cassie was just talking about the complexity in her organization of like theming and multi-brand. We heard that from some others who spoke, like this idea of like building that infrastructure, that core set of decisions that enable the kinds of things that are needed in your org. We can do a lot of that through the technology that we have in tokens and the sort of rising specifications that we're kind of agreeing on there. With that robust token architecture, we can also let consuming teams adopt the system at those lower levels, right? Instead of forcing them to only adopt components, we can let them build their own stuff following the composition patterns we've established, or just use the tokens, right? Like that's a form of adoption too. And then, of course, the acknowledgement of the cultural side of the work. Like something else that sort of hit me just, in the last couple of weeks about that cultural stuff is when I was in Bristol with a few of the folks here, I led a full day workshop on design system culture mapping, and it was packed. We had 50 people show up for this thing, and it was zero tactical. We didn't open Figma once, all we did was talk about how to assess culture. And this was at a design system event. And I just am thinking, if I tried to run a workshop like that a few years ago, nobody would have shown up. Like I guarantee you, nobody would have shown up. And today, I think it's probably the most important work that we can be doing. So there's a change here, right? Like this is becoming something that is common for teams to be thinking about, which it definitely wasn't just a few years ago. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the future. And of course, we can't make it through a conversation about the future of design systems without talking a little bit about artificial intelligence and the way that that's sort of shifting our thinking in the space. I had a chance to invite Nathan Curtis to come co-host with me just earlier this year on an episode of The Question. And we were joking in preparation for this episode about what we should do. We knew we wanted to talk a little bit about AI, but we came up with the most clickbaity title ever, which is where AI is failing design systems, to be more specific. And we kind of did that a little bit tongue in cheek, but also honestly, we felt like it was time to have a real conversation about that, with a lot of the hype, a lot of the excitement, almost all of us working in organizations where people above us in leadership are saying, AI can do everything. Just sprinkle some AI on it, right? Like, I mean, I know you've heard that. I know you've heard that. That is very common these days, right? And so, like, in that sort of context, he and I were thinking, like, how do we challenge that a little bit, right? Like, how do we come at this from a critical view? And so it was an interesting conversation. And one of the things that came out of that conversation was a diagram that we drew together in that FigJam during the deep dive. And it's not pretty, but here it is. And you'll see in this, if you ignore the stickies for a moment, this very common sort of design, the sort of like double diamond design thinking thing, right? So on the left the diamond is the problem space. On the right, it's the solution space. The process we go through, this is high level in general, but we go through this divergent process of discovery to understand the problem space first. And then we do the converging side of that diamond where we define the problem, the specific problem we're going to solve. Then we move into the solution space where we develop, we diverge again into all the possible solutions. And then we do the second half of that second diamond where we converge on a specific delivery of a problem solution. I'm sorry. And so with that sort of diverge, converge approach, the double diamond, when we looked through all the responses that we got in this episode of the question, one of the things that we asked was, where is AI working really well for you and where is it not? And it was pretty easy to see the pattern emerge that in the divergent tasks, AI was really helpful. But in the convergent tasks, where we were trying to hone in on a very specific solution or a specific definition of a problem, that's when things got a little dicey and we weren't as happy with the results. And so this, to me, kind of just like was a moment where it was a lot of clarity for me around the current state of what we can do with these tools. About a month later, Nathan published one of his more recent articles called Components as Data. And this was like, it's a fascinating read. Like, it's a little bit technical, but it's also just really interesting. So I would encourage you to go read this. There's a link in the resources section of the Fig Jam if you can get it to work. But what I really liked about this article is that it shows kind of his approach to addressing the more convergent parts of the process, the ones that weren't working well, right? That we've identified already as a community. AI is not doing this well. And so just to kind of like summarize the article, I don't want to try to cover everything, so definitely go read it. But in summary, in the same way that we codify very simple design decisions as tokens, right? A name and a value. You can say primary color blue. This sort of is an article about taking that to the next level and asking the question, how could we do the same thing to codify entire components, both visually, but also behaviorally, and the relationships between them? And so it's obviously quite a bit more complicated than just name value pairs, right? When you get into trying to do this, and you can see in the image on the bottom right, some YAML of like some of the stuff that he's been working on, right? Where he's trying to say, what are all the properties? What are all the styles? How do these things connect? So it's definitely complicated work, but if you want your AI, your generative AI stuff to build interfaces that actually adhere to your system, you're going to have to be really explicit about how to follow those rules, right? And this is the work of being explicit about what we want. I think the way I would say this is that the stochastic nature of AI works against the promises of consistency and quality that we make as design system practitioners, right? So like unpack that a little bit, right? AI, I can ask it the same question 4 or 5 times and get pretty different answers. And that's very much not the way that we promise our consumers the experience will be when they use the system. So there is a bit of a disconnect between these things, right? And so what we can do about this, I think there's some easy things, right? Of course, we can lean in to the areas where AI is working well for us today. Things like discovery and exploration, summaries, first drafts. If you've got work where you're refactoring code, there's a lot of I've seen a lot of evidence of folks having really good success at this, right? You can define sort of the kinds of things you need changed and ask it to help. And of course, some lower risk prototyping. And then of course, to have a say in how this stuff evolves, we have to be the ones that are experimenting with it, right? So we need to be experimenting in those areas where AI needs work. So that's the higher fidelity stuff that's coming from your system, the production level code, the strong visual decisions, right? Like we still have a lot of folks that I know are still including, of course, human taste as a part of this process, right? We can't outsource that yet. And then consistency and repeatability. So I'll also say this, every single tooling company in the system space and every other space is working really hard on these problems too. And so, like even just some of the stuff that was released recently with Figma, at the Config event a couple weeks back, like teams that are putting this stuff into use are seeing much better results when the ecosystem of tools start to actually expose all of these things in the way that they actually store them. Oh, sorry, I'm just seeing something, a different slide or something. Is this okay, Sandra? Sorry, I see you, but give me a thumbs up when you're ready and I'll move on. Yeah, I think it's like this idea that the tools are finally exposing the underlying data structures that they have is encouraging, because that means at this point everybody's got an MCP server, right? Like you're getting access to those data structures. So I'm going to move us down to the next section here, which is the future, and let's spend just a couple of minutes taking a peek, because I asked you all 2 questions about the future of systems. One was, what is your biggest concern about the future of design systems? And overwhelmingly, AI came up in almost all of these answers, right? So when I'm asking you something about what worries you about the future, things like, the subpar results of AI tools, higher ups assuming that once a system is created for AI, they feel as if they can lay off design system designers, right? Very real fears. People rushing to use it, overconsumption of it, AI slop, too easy to use and thus break, misunderstanding the capabilities of humans will be left out of the process completely. That systems will become too mechanical and lose their humanity. Some like really valid, almost like ethical concerns that I kind of saw coming up in your answers. And then lots of other things. Again, I've only pulled a handful of the answers here, so check out that raw data. But when I tried to categorize those things, they kind of came down to mostly about these sort of four areas. So the AI threat, things like the slop, premature use, the perception of our leaders, all of that stuff there was a lot of it. But there was also a bucket of concerns around like when do we standardize, not related to AI, when do we standardize and when do we innovate? Like it's still unclear in a lot of organizations when is the right moment to do these things. And I think nobody talks about this. It's like leaders are just saying innovate. They're not giving clarity around where to innovate. And so then it's kind of left to teams. It's left to folks like you and I to make those decisions about when we do it. Speed versus quality. I cannot tell you how many people right now are struggling with this. It's a season where, and I think this is what the future holds for us. Smaller teams expected to do more, and the reason we justify that inside of a lot of the organizations we work in is sprinkle some AI on it, right? Like we think just use some tools, use some AI to make you faster. And certainly there are places where that can happen, but there's a whole lot of places where that doesn't make a lot of sense yet. And then there were a lot of comments around just how it's hard to show value still, like it still feels like a lot of people are worried about the future where they haven't cracked the nut of, clear metrics or, things like this, that help them demonstrate value to leaders. Any other thoughts from you all on biggest fears that we didn't touch on here? Just raise your hand in the Zoom and I'll invite you into the conversation. It's okay. We can continue on to question 3 and always come back to that. Yeah, Shannon, I see you. What's up?
So you're asking about biggest fear in relation to AI, right?
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, so I'm more developer than designer, but we've already seen a lot of issues recently. Vibe coding is a common term that we use. There's a lot of issues of that. A lot of AI is not very smart, especially if you're using like cursor, which is what I've been trying to play around with. And so it makes so many mistakes. And we recently had a developer use AI to build out functionality. And instead of it looking and seeing what was already there and making it fit in, it just reinvented the wheel. So like, I don't know. There's like all these, I'm in this industry where we're having a lot of layoffs because of AI, like Salesforce and stuff. And I think they're all going to get rehired, honestly, because the code is just such a nightmare. And but I'm really curious to know more about like how AI is impacting design specifically, and like is it having the same issues in design where it's really not that smart and you're better off just doing it yourself? It just feels like Stack Overflow 2.0 when devs used to just copy and paste and not understand what the heck they're even doing.
Yeah, Shannon, super interesting to hear. And I've heard a lot of similar stories, and I've also heard other sides of this, like where folks have worked very hard to sort of essentially become context engineers, context designers, to make sure that the AI has everything it needs to be able to make choices that are smarter. And so I think it's easy to be skeptical. I'm not saying that your experience is not valid. A lot of people are having the same problems, right? But I think there is a level of sort of effort, that's really required. If we just point these things at a repo and say, expect magic, we're not going to get good results. And so like that's where I'm starting to wonder about, and a lot of folks in systems see design systems as the input for a lot of this stuff, right? If we have already gone through all the work of defining the rules, defining the sort of core elements, we should be able to find ways to give that to AI tooling and allow it to kind of be smart in terms of generative stuff. So would love to hear from some designers in answer to Shannon's question about that. And also, Lydia, I see your hand up. What's up?
Yeah, I just wanted to call out specifically in response to Shannon's question that some of the things that we're doing in our design system is kind of like looking at our responsibility to bridge that gap. So how do we make it so that like our specific product designers don't have to build incredible context, but how can we evolve the design system so that we're more than just design assets, code assets, and documentation? We now also will give you prompts so that everyone across the board is using the same prompt to get more consistable and reliable output from the models. What kind of agents can we build so that we're still kind of responsible for centralizing that consistency and figuring out how to scale it out to folks without them having to learn on their own and potentially silo good thinking.
I love that, Lydia, that you're saying your system team is not just offering assets in terms of design and development stuff, but also in terms of using AI. Like, here's a prompt you could use, that kind of thing. I love that.
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great approach to this stuff. If we know teams are going to be using it anyway, right? We might as well give them a good start. Caroline, what's up?
Yeah, I found that, AI does really well when you give it that context. And it definitely is our job to provide that as the like kind of bridger of gap. The problem that comes down to, especially with design is also using it as a thought partner. But AI is really bad at thinking critically about ideating. It only will be able to provide results based on previous instances, previous knowledge. So not only is it like bad for design as a design thought partner because they're not, thinking outside of the box, but it also, I'm worried for design systems that all of these AIs are going to be trained on or be utilizing the same concepts across the board of design systems. So design systems won't even evolve either if we're using it as a way to build our systems. And so like, how do we continue to think creatively, critically, out of the box and not use AI to just generate the same thing over and over and over again?
Yeah. Oof. Yeah. So important. And it's like, that's part of what I loved about looking back at the history of our space is it was like moments where you could see things were just sort of like it was more and more of the same. And it took somebody as an individual in the space willing to kind of step up and say, no, you know what? Like, we need to think differently about this for it to shift the mindset and the thinking of the industry. That's happened in music. That happened in the 50s with, jazz music when Miles and his crew were like, you know what? No, we're going to reset. We're not going to just make faster, more complex music. We're going to chill it out for a little bit. And that completely changed the whole way we thought about jazz at the time. So I think that's maybe the moment that we're in, like, and we're the people who have to stand up and say that stuff, So thanks, Caroline. I love that. Elise, jump in.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit earlier about, components, basic components, atomic components being kind of table stakes, and then, where is the value? Where are we focusing on systems? And I think, to Caroline, to your point, this is why I feel like of all the things that we are doing in design systems, building these atomic components, and especially, everybody's talking about, the use case of like have AI like build all these components, or like generate part of this design out of Figma. It's like it's the same input, it's the same button, it's the same layout. It's all like we're generating it in like a worse way, and we're kind of doing this like of course the code you generate out of Figma is never going to be as robust as code that you've built in the browser in a real system that takes into consideration all of the interactions and possibilities and capabilities of your code base. And so I think this is where like I've been really thinking about how do we use AI tools not to do some of these, I'm going to say, basic parts of design system work, like make designs or make inputs and buttons or cards or like make components or write docs, but use it in other ways to actually like help our teams explore like how to put together things with the system, or to bring alignment, right? Like make prototypes to like help bring alignment, like using the system, things like that. And I mean, it's still very, very early. Like sometimes it's good at it, sometimes it's not good at it. We're very early with all of these tools. But Ben, to your point about Jazz, I think that if we stay very focused on this idea that what we can do with AI is generate our core atomic components and have it make designs for us, I think we're going to remain disappointed. And I think because I just don't think that those are particularly the most valuable things that we even do in systems,
Totally.
much less to have a computer do it.
Yeah. So I think to summarize, and tell me if I'm wrong, Elise, I hear you saying like, let's be really smart about where we do this, like not assume that it can tackle the whole process, like maybe be smaller in scope initially until we can build up proof across different parts of our processes to see it succeed. Is that accurate in some way?
Yeah. I mean, I think obviously there's been a lot of hype around AI. And so I think maybe and I'm not saying we shouldn't experiment or try things, but I think a lot of times maybe we come to it with these sort of unrealistic expectations, right? Like, like the AI is going to like do designs for me. Like a lot of the tools that are out there are 75% hype. Like they're not actually fully delivering on the things that they say that they can do. I think some of them are going to get there. I've made some bets on some of the products and tools that I think are actually going to deliver. And if you saw my Converge talk, like I was showing some of the things that I think are places that we should be focusing. But we come into it and we say, I'm gonna do this like Figma AI thing, and it's gonna like make new iterations of the design for me, or it's just gonna like build this entire product for me. And I don't want to say it's all because like we don't know how to write good prompts. I'm not trying to put this back necessarily on humans. I think the tools are not totally there yet, but we are asking for something that's not possible and then being like AI entirely sucks. And but then what we're asking it to do, I just don't even know if that's the right thing for us to be focusing on having it do. And so I guess my prompt or my encouragement is just like, what are some other parts of this that aren't like, somebody was talking a minute ago, I'm sorry, I forget who it was, talking about asking it to do design is not a good thought partner for iterating on design because it can't think out of the box. Well, like then why are we having that be the thing that we want it to replace from our work? Like what are other things that we can be doing that actually are like interesting or useful or that like aren't happening for us?
Yeah. That's fair. Yeah, it's totally fair. At least I think like, the sort of critical question is like, okay, if you see it not working well in areas where you're trying, leadership is pressuring or whatever, then we have to be the ones that kind of surface that, right, to leaders and say, actually, we think it's better used in these scenarios and here's why. So I think that's really smart. Anita, what's on your mind?
Yeah, I thought I'd just share an experience. So our design systems team recently decided to focus on looking at AI prototyping tools that
at our company, there's a lot of encouragement. People can kind of try out whatever they want. Designers can prototype away. We decided to go and compare tools specifically from the perspective of design system integrations, because we're like, we want to control or try at least to support, I wouldn't say control, support this journey and ensure people don't go off the deep end. And so we did go through that. It was tough and painful. Really, it was. But what I wanted to share is our designers were encouraged, our feature designers were encouraged to use these different tools and give their feedback consistently across all the tools that they tested. The piece of feedback was, this does not integrate with our design system. We want it to integrate with our design system, which I found extremely encouraging. I think like the hype part, we've kind of passed that. It can do cool stuff. And I think they're now back on like, I actually am trying to prototype something that I need to validate with our users. And I want this to look like our product. And I do that by using our design system.
Yeah.
So that was just really great to see, like, yeah, designers want that even with all these fabulous tools that can maybe or maybe not make their lives easier in some ways.
That's probably a really good signal for you, Anita, that, culturally the organization is relying on the right things, like that's probably like, that's a pat on the back for you and your team, right? That they see the value of the system. So that's a great story. Excellent. Thank you, folks, for sharing. Let's talk quickly about question 3. Then I've got one last little exercise we'll do to kind of wrap up. So this is the opposite side of the coin, not necessarily what fears do you have, but what's actually exciting you about where AI could actually, or any technology, not just AI, but where the future of systems could go. There were so many great responses that you all had here. I love that you actually take the time to answer these without just kind of dropping in a one word answer. But there was a lot about blurring the lines between development and design. And the reason I love that and wanted to call that one out first is because when you go look at the answers to what brought you into the space, a lot of us came in because that's who we are. We're the line blurrers, like we're the people between design and dev a lot of times. And so to hear that we're excited about the future of systems, it means that we see that as the future, that we see there is a possibility of bringing these disciplines together. As long as I've been in this space, that's something that we've been struggling with, right? As long as there have been designers and developers, we've had to try to figure out how to get them to get along. And so, perhaps there's some excitement because systems do that, again, closing the gap between design and engineering. But there were lots of answers. I tried to categorize these as well. And again, just a reminder, there's a full spreadsheet of all the data off to the left at the top. But if I were to try and summarize, there was a lot around AI also, right? So the top one for fears was AI, and the top one for excitement was also AI. And this is like both of those things can be true for us, at the same time. But a lot of it was a little bit more nuanced, right? Like AI as amplification, not just as the one doing all the stuff, right? And I think that meant amplifying what humans are already good at, or the DSS context, like, using the system work that we do to feed into AI. There was excitement about recognition and acceptance. While some folks are worried about the future because they haven't quite figured out how to show value, a lot of folks have solved that problem. They're getting good feedback from leadership, or like the story like Anita shared, where just practitioners in the org see the value of the system, right? So that's starting to happen, and people are feeling good about that. Again, that solving designer developer collab we talked about. Goodness gracious, tokens. I think there's a lot of excitement right now because of the specification, that first, like kind of solid release of that. But also just, I think people are getting these things to actually work, right? When you have complex branding, complex product space, you can really simplify that by being smart about how your tokens are architected and serving the right things to the right teams. And that abstraction can be so valuable, and people get excited about that. And then, of course, the community, there was a lot in there about just, I think, feeling like there is movement in the systems community, like we're finding each other, and having opportunities to have solid discourse and discussion. I would love to open this up, but I want to make sure we end on time. So we're going to move on from question 3, and I want to just have, hopefully this works for us. Hopefully the Fig Jam is going to cooperate, but I want to have you do, so I've been using this little spectrum diagram for a while now. And the way that I've been thinking about things anytime, not just in systems work, but anytime that I've got like a problem I'm not quite sure about and I want to understand it more, it's a little bit like pros and cons here, but I'm trying to like pit 2 ideas against each other. And so I thought it could be really fun for us to have a quick conversation and a little exercise of like dropping sticky notes here, where we could talk about 2 possible futures for systems. Okay. One of those futures is a healthy technology-centered one. So this is where AI is kind of leading a lot of the effort. And one of those is a healthy human-centered one. And that's where humans stay in control, like we are driving a lot of these things. And of course, in the spectrum, you can see there's these extreme ends, right, where the unhealth creeps in. And so I've labeled those technology only and human only. And I have 2 examples for you that are from my love of science fiction. So does anybody recognize the Borg Queen here from Star Trek? Sorry if you're sensitive to weird images, because this is one for sure. But I love this as an example, right? And I have this out on the far left tech unhealth. Basically, this is all over science fiction, but the Borg from Star Trek they kind of are like a model for the loss of human diversity, right? It's like every human is sort of, or every race pulled into this Borg, right? This hive mind, essentially, where we all share thought, we all share the same characteristics. And this is like a weird future, right? Where we essentially give up what makes us unique as a payment to be a part of something bigger. They call it the collective or the hive mind. And if you've heard this phrase, resistance is futile, that is the Borg, right? That comes from Star Trek. So that's one very, very extreme end, right? And the other extreme end actually comes from something a little bit very dissimilar in Frank Herbert's Dune. So if you've been following along with some of the big movies and stuff, they don't talk a ton about this, but in the TV series that came out recently, there's a scene where they hint at some of the back history in this story. And in this writing, there's a future state where humanity has been so physically and psychologically harmed by what he calls thinking machines, which is essentially AI, that every thinking machine is destroyed in what he calls a crusade, essentially. Like it's an annihilation of thinking machines. And there's even in that back history a religious sect in there, and they have this thing called the Supreme Commandment, and they say, "Thou shalt not make a machine in the likeness of a human mind." And there's one scene where some kid has like a little toy that is essentially a thinking machine, and if you watch the way they shoot this scene, the people in the scene are like losing their minds that one of these things exists, right? There is real fear about this. And so this is the opposite, right? Like in the Borg, everybody has given in and we are all part of the same, technology. But in this model, we are afraid of it, right? Like there's these very different, extreme ends. So I'd love to just take a few minutes and drop a sticky note here and tell me how you see systems playing into this analogy, right? What is a healthy system characteristic that leans tech first? What is one that leans human first? How do we find the middle ground here? And as we're doing this, you can raise your hand in Zoom. We can just kind of talk through this too. So if you have a thought on this balance, just raise your hand. I'd love to bring you into the conversation. I see some folks already adding some stuff. So Ismail, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you're willing to share kind of what you're thinking about, I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, okay.
Sure.
So thank you, Ben. To be fair, I'm maybe too pessimistic because of the reading of the book Rise of AI and sorry, the talk of John Voss on Converge, which is really about being too techno-optimistic and just forgetting about the value that we are searching for and the human. So personally, I think that we will go into an unhealthy situation. And I think that not in the design system world, but in the product design world and with all that is happening with AI right now, I think that we are running behind like the technology more than we are running behind the values and the human values. So that's why my answer is pessimistic.
Yeah, that's fascinating to hear. So are you saying the hype is sort of moving us forward as opposed to, intention from humans about what we actually want and need? Is that kind of a summary?
Yeah, exactly. In fact, it's just that we don't really focus on what really have matters, on what really have value for humanity. And maybe I'm too much into Rays of AI that I'm reading for the moment, where we try to have AGI to like solve every human problem instead of
Yeah.
just focusing on them right now. So that's why I'm seeing that with a pessimistic view, that we are, I think, as design systems, because design systems have to answer like operational and delivery focused problems, that we are going in that way, on that road.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's you're helping me make the sort of point in a more clear way that I think I'm trying to drive towards for us, which is that without intention, these things are just going to happen, right? And so it's kind of up to us as a community to step in and make some choices and be intentional with the ways that we put this stuff into practice. Thanks, Ismail, for sharing. I appreciate that. Who else wants to jump in? I see some other notes. If you've got something added, raise your hand. Cassie, I see one. Laura, I see one. Sam, Kyle, jump in, folks.
I can jump in.
Yeah.
I think I have like two different visions, like one that is my hope and one is the reality that I see things happening in the future. So my hope is that we strike a balance. And I know that the vision that I feel like a lot of people want for AI is for it to be like Jarvis from Iron Man,
Yeah.
where it very much is this assistive AI. But at the end of the day, like Tony Stark is the one who is making the decisions. And he's the one that knows that he just needs like an assistant. I think the reality is that we will have our accurate achievement. Like we are going to fly too close to the sun, and we're going to rely too heavily on a technology that is not ready for that kind of weight. But then we'll get closer to balance. It's just going to take some time and a bit of a human error moment.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you. Appreciate that. Guy, what's up?
Well, you can probably guess what my thoughts are about, machines versus people. I don't think the decision is going to be up to us. I think the decision is going to be made for us, but I don't see technology leading the way necessarily, especially not within the context we currently live in, which is Gen AI, LLMs, those kind of things, because the bubble is going to burst, whether it's 6 months or a year or 2 years, but it has a certain time frame that it's going to burst, and you're going to have tools staying, right? There's going to be some things that are we're still going to have these tools that we have today, but it's not going to be, there's no AGI around the corner, and there's no like whatever the marketing those companies are putting out there, that's more for their shareholders. So it's not going to be a fully technological future. There's going to be a technology assisted future, right? Just like we have with computers and the internet and, Figma versus sketching on a whiteboard. So that's why I think it's still going to be, it's not going to be doom and gloom as people think. It's going to be terrible when a bubble bursts and a lot of people are going to lose their job and the market is going to crash. But in the long run, we're going to get to the next technology fad.
Yeah, that's interesting. I see a couple folks saying something similar. Let's see, a recalibration point from Kyle, and I saw Kelby saying, I think eventually we'll end up more on the human side, but we're headed the other way now. So I think you're not alone in that fear, Guy. I think when I hear that perspective, one of the things that just as like a critique or as a challenge to it, it's in some ways, I think AI is different than a lot of the other technologies that we've sort of like seen come and go, right? And so it's in one sense, looking back at our history is valuable, but if the thing that's happening is not like the things in the past, then it's hard to know how much we can rely on what has happened in the past. But I'll let you respond to that, Guy.
Yeah, I have a couple of quick things. One is, this is turning into Guy's pet peeves meeting. But another pet peeve I have is people anthropomorphizing AI.
Yeah.
I see people like, I saw someone that I used to kind of look up to in the design thought leadership world post that they always add think deeply to their prompts. And it just blows my mind because, first of all, AI doesn't think, like LLMs don't think, but also they don't even read. They transform all the words into numbers, and then those numbers go into the engine. So they don't even know what think deeply means in that sense.
Yep.
So that's one thing. The other thing is that AI is different in a sense that it allows you to not think. Like, for example, I know a lot of people say the metaphor, people were also against calculators when those came out. But before I use a calculator, I still need to understand what sort of calculation I need to do and why. With AI, I can just describe the problem and it's going to do the thinking for me, the sort of the way to get there for me. And either I can tell if it did the right job or not. So it's an amplifier for people who already know what they're doing, but it's not going to help you if you don't know anything to begin with. Like someone I see all those people post on LinkedIn, oh, my 4-year-old vibe coded an app yesterday and awesome. How does it handle security and authentication and the backend and all those things, right? So that's why, yes, it gives the impression of something that looks like the real thing if you don't know enough about how to get to the real thing.
Yeah. And that brings up the question of like, what are we giving up by outsourcing some of this stuff to AI, right? Like, especially as new folks are trying to make their way into the industry, like if we're saying it's a low level engineer, we don't need those folks, and we're outsourcing all of that learning opportunity to an AI because we think it can give us a quick head start. Goodness, we're stealing the futures of people, in some ways. And it's hard to get a culture to make decisions that are really smart about the future. And so I think that I agree with a lot of folks that show here that we're kind of like, we're going to lean heavy on the tech side for a while until we learn those lessons, maybe. This is phenomenal, y'all. I'm going to spend some time reading through all of these. But I want to honor our time. We've only got just a couple minutes left. So thank you for joining in the conversation in this way. There's a couple other things you can do if you have a little time to drop. I'd love to hear, what future do you actually want? And then following on, what choices do we have to make now to enable that future? But I want to just hop us over to kind of wrap up to our presentation, and tell me if you're seeing this again. Give me a thumbs up if you're seeing okay, thank you, Sandra. Appreciate y'all helping me out with that. So I think I want to encourage folks to think deeply about this, right? It's not enough to just be reading what people are writing in our space about these things. There are values that we can pull from great thinkers from years and years ago, and from folks who are thinking and writing now. And so I'm just dropping in a handful of things that have been really influential for me, authors and speakers and thinkers that have been influential for me over the last few years. Christopher Alexander, we mentioned already, The Timeless Way, Pattern, like all the stuff he's written is phenomenal. He's a bit of an eccentric dude, but he's a deep, deep thinker. Donella Meadows has some incredible stuff. Was an author in a column called The Global Citizen, but she's writing and thinking about conservate, like how do we care for the earth? And so the scope and the scale at which she's trying to solve system problems is mind numbing to me. Like if you want to talk about systems work, think about the ecology of the world, right? Like this is a big scale, and it's really interesting and such well thought out arguments. Neil Thies has a book called Notes on Complexity. It's a short, very easy read, and it's got so many interesting little, tidbits on systems thinking and how that fits into biology and all the other sciences. Russell Ackoff is an old system thinking professor. He was a professor, I think, at Harvard. Tons of lectures and old writings, a great storyteller, just fun little analogies that you can use. Robin Wall Kimmerer, you've heard me probably talk about her. She's a Potawatomi botanist, and she has a book called Braiding Sweetgrass that has completely changed the framing that I have when I come to this work a lot. So, and these are just, I mean, there's so many more, so drop your links to authors, thinkers, systems people in the FigJam for us. Like we need more of this, right? Everybody needs to be reading this stuff. That is in some ways like, that's the job, is knowing this kind of stuff and digging into these things. Just to kind of wrap up, I kind of see there's that sort of like two potential futures for us. And, I do think we have some choices to make about what we want that to look like. In that human-centered future, we've got to become system thinkers. We've got to do the work. We have to, make technology that amplifies our diversity instead of squashes it. And in that tech-centered one, we're sort of giving up and becoming context designers and engineers, right? Crafting tech as the solution. And hopefully in both of those scenarios, we avoid the Borg. And I just want to wrap with this one little sort of like idea, right? This is back to Massimo Vignelli. He was, if you read some of the stuff he's done and written, he was always so impressed with, I think, the way that the field of architecture had kind of this higher level of discourse happening. And he talked a lot about some of the things where he just said, like, they talk about things. They really engage with each other. And I think he was, clearly he was looking for that moment in graphic design too. And this is in 1983. He got an invitation from Walter Herdig, who was the editor of the Graphis Annual. It was a big sort of publication that was really popular. And he took that as an opportunity to kind of write or issue a challenge. And he called it the Call for Criticism. And what he was trying to do here was push the design community at the time toward more rigorous approach of what he called design criticism or critique. And he writes this idea that historical information, introspection, and interpretation are almost totally missing in our profession. And I think we feel a tremendous need to fill that gap. With criticism, designers will be offered the possibility of multi-layered reading of the work of other designers. Criticism will prevent, to a great extent, the superficial spreading of fads, or in any case will provide ground for their evaluation in the proper context. Graphic design will not be a profession until we have criticism. And when I think about the future of systems, it feels like we're in a similar moment. And we, as a community, have to take steps towards creating the future that we want. Otherwise, it will be created for us. And so I want to just invite you into a season of criticism with me, right? Like for that to work, we each have to find opportunities to discuss this stuff, to have thick skin, to have our work critiqued. And these unconferences and the question and Redwood's design system community, these are all spaces that I'm trying to make to have those conversations, but you can make those spaces too, right? That means you need to take some time to write your own thoughts down. The clarity that comes with you writing the words in your brain out is really what we need right now as an industry. And then, of course, find opportunities to have those words critiqued. Find people who share your vision of the future and people who don't, and ask for critique on those words. I just want to thank you all so much for being here. We're a couple minutes over, so I don't want to hold you, but it's always an honor to jump on a call like this with so many smart folks. Thank you all.